What's up, everybody? We are back with another $2 deck tech for 2DH, a format we created to have a new meta for Commander to make the game more accessible to new players and players on a budget. This is my Musio Visionary Architect deck, and as you might have guessed, this is going to be a two-color deck if you count Colorless as one of your colors, which I think it's safe to say you can do after the Battle for Zendikar block. So, the goal of this deck is to get some big artifacts into play so that you can exploit Muzzio's ability to look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the highest CMC among artifacts you control, and then put one into play for free. So we're running a fair amount of artifacts. We've also got a lot of lands that can tap for colorless, 13 of which. We've got a whole bunch of ramp and card draw. This deck is very mid-rangey. It doesn't really have like infinite combos that it gets to. It's just sort of an in-the-game, play-the-game kind of a deck with a whole bunch of cute artifact interactions and cards that get artifacts and do things like give them flash. And then a nice little set of control cards, alternate win conditions, things like that to slow down your opponents. So the first thing you want to do with Musio is get some high CMC cards into play. Mirror Enforcer really fits that because it has affinity for artifacts. So in addition to your mana rocks tapping for mana, they're also reducing the cost of this by 1, and it can be a really early way to enable Musio. You've also got wonderful payoff cards that would go in several EDH decks anyways, like Steel Hellkite. Just a fantastic card, can help blue deal with any kind of threats that it normally wouldn't be able to, like certain creatures or enchantments. Sandstone Oracle is one of my favorite cards in the deck. It just refills your hand. You choose an opponent that's been sitting on a lot of cards, or they've stalled out and for whatever reason they have a bunch, and you just draw up to that many. Mirror Battlesphere is one of the big payoff cards in the deck. It just has fantastic synergy with pretty much everything going on in the deck. This deck does generally need to win with combat damage in the mid to late game in order to win the game. Inkwell Leviathan is another one of those big, massive threats. It also has Shroud, so it's a wonderful way to just put a clock on your opponents while interacting with them and stopping them from racing you. And Nullstone Gargoyle is one of those cards you only run in a Musio deck because it just shuts down your opponents from board wiping or doing some of the other things, slows them down, all while Musio is just happily tapping for that activated cost of 4 and putting things into play that may or may not be non-creatures. Colossus of Akros is another one of those really silly things to cheat into play. You can potentially monstrous this thing in this deck too fairly early on because you are making a ton of mana and just grinding out card advantage land drops. That's just what blue is great at doing when you're playing kind of a control version. Conduit of Ruin is fantastic in this deck because it puts the card on top of your deck and you can then activate Musio to cheat it into play. It also makes future turns makes your creatures cost less when you put them into play. So it helps you hard cast some of these guys that might have snuck their way into your hand. And then finally you've got Spine of Ishsaw as another big dirtily 7 mana thing that you can cheat into play with Musio. So that's most of the top end, so you can just kind of see what's out there if you're interested in building a Musio deck. Those are some of the payoff cards. Let's get to the colorless mana base here. We've got quite a bit of utility these days. Buried Ruin can get an artifact back from your graveyard to your hand. High Market can sacrifice a creature that you've stolen, or maybe one that your opponent is trying to steal. The card has a lot of utility. Sometimes you can use it to counter a spell that's targeting a creature, like a Capsize or something like that as well. Phyrexia's Core is in here to sacrifice certain artifacts that I'll show you later. Mystifying Maze, just a great defensive spell. Mirror Pool just recently came under $2. Hopefully it'll stay there. This will let you copy an instant or sorcery spell you control. Alternatively, you can copy a creature you control to double that ETB or effect of having that creature in play. Really strong card in this deck. Seagate Wreckage for when you run out of cards, you can draw one. Rogue's Passage for some evasion that you might need. Tech Edge to get rid of those pesky non-basics. Mishra's Factory just as another potential creature, chump blocker, or whatever you might need. Taps for colorless, so that's why it's in there. Tomb of the Spirit Dragon in a pinch can give you a little bit of life gain if you happen to be up against some aggressive decks. Darksteel in there, it's just an indestructible land that taps for colorless. Mage Ring Network, storage land that only really works for colorless spells. Temple of the False God to ramp, and Halimar Depths, so you know whether or not your Musio is going to hit. And you can set up certain other things as well. Alright, so here is the massive pile of ramp and card draw that you have at your disposal. Chief Engineer, really cool card. I have several ways to make, some extra little dirtily artifact guys, including this one, and it gives your artifacts Convoke, making them cheaper for tapping creature. Also really sweet art. Ethereum Sculptor makes all your artifacts cost 1 less, potentially making some of them free. Sky Diamond is just a mana rock. Mind Stone, Thought Vessel, so that you can have way too many cards in your hand. Silver Mirror is nice because it's an artifact creature as well as tapping for mana, so sometimes you need that creature. Palladium Mirror, really fast ramp spell in this deck, just exactly what we're looking for. So I've got a lot of ways to generate colorless mana in addition to the lands, as you can see. Burnished Heart, just kind of an auto-include in any deck that wants to ramp and doesn't have green. Semblance Anvil. So what's interesting about this card is if you exile, let's say, Burnished Heart, it makes creatures 2 cheaper and artifacts 2 cheaper. So it can have double the ramp effect. Really cool card. It's obviously a risky card, but I mean that's kind of what we're doing in this deck, is taking some risks to get some advantage. Power Stone makes sense. Unstable Obelisk is really cool tech because sometimes blue just needs to deal with things, and this lets you do it, albeit at an expensive cost. Then we run some of these big, expensive mana rocks like Hedron Archive and Dreamstone Hedron because they let you tap Musio to look at more cards in addition to being mana rocks, and you just want a high density of artifacts that you can hit. They're also fine in the late game if you just need to draw some cards. And Chalice is in there as well to just get some really strong ramp going. Alright, for card draw, we've got Ponder. Really nice because you can see whether or not Musio is going to hit, or it just smooths out your draws. Brainstorm is super tech because you can put one of those expensive guys from your hand that you couldn't cast on top of your library, then activate Musio to cheat it into play. So, not that this card isn't great anyways, but you don't always see it in EDH decks because it's not really card advantage. In this deck, it's a fantastic way to get Musio going. Skull Clamp, I'm going to make several 1/1s. Just makes perfect sense in this deck. Thoughtcast can be a 1-mana draw too, pretty solid. Boots to protect your threats or Musio, long-term plans. Really cool because you put what you want to cheat into play on top of your library, and then you activate Musio to cheat it into play, so another great enabler for Musio's ability. And then we're making a bunch of little dorks, so Biden of Thassa and Deep Fathom Skulker, they just turn all these like bad little ramp guys into card draw engines if you need to just draw some cards with your Silver Mirror. So why not? Also can make something unblockable for the turn. And then Future Sight, sweet card, another way to sort of see if Musio is going to hit or not, potentially. But really this card just goes in most blue decks that are mid-range or control and want to play it. Even some aggro decks want this card. This is just one of the best cards in Magic, in my opinion. Staffinin, really nice for the little ping effect to clean up some guys. We have some things that want you to target that I'll show you later in the game, so keep in mind that Staffinin is a free target effect, and it gives you the card draw, and it's a 6-mana artifact. I mean, you can see what the deck's doing here, and why not play Treasure Cruise? We're going to get some stuff in our graveyard. People are going to kill some things. We're going to cast some spells. Why would you not? Mono Blue has a ton of good things to sort of grease the wheels and get this deck going. Shimmer Mirror gives all of your artifacts flash. Your opponents don't know if you're holding up Counterspell or Musio, or you're going to bring in a Hellkite. This is just a fantastic card, and it has flash itself, so why would you not run it? Revoker can potentially be useful, can stop some activated abilities, and again, we just want some cheap artifact creatures. We want a high density of artifacts. Mirror Retriever can return a artifact from your graveyard to your hand, which can be really strong in the late game when your opponents have already spent their removal spells on your artifacts and don't have any more. Also dies to Skull Clamp, also triggers Biden of Thassa, etc., etc. Treasure Mage and Trinket Mage. They're going in opposite directions, but they're doing a similar thing. Treasure Mage can go get one of those big fatties that I showed you in the opener, and Trinket Mage can go get your Skull Clamp or one of your other little utility cards. Whirler Rogue, really nice. Gives you some flying blockers if people are being aggressive. It gives you things to sacrifice, gives you things to draw cards with. Skull Clamp, feeders. I mean, so many good reasons to run Whirler Rogue in a deck like this. Now we're looking at some of the sweet stuff here. So, Prototype Portal. You can get rid of one of your cheaper artifacts if you're in the early game and then just start making them over and over and over, or you can get rid of something really powerful and then start putting one of those into play every single turn if you're towards the late game. I don't even know all the ways that this deck works yet because I have so many cards like this that are just sort of silly, weird utility cards. I mean, you can make 100 crystal shards with this thing if you want to lock out the board. I don't even know what I'm doing yet. All I know is artifact decks are really fun and they got a lot of play to them, and especially when you're playing blue. There's a lot of stuff that you have to be in the game and paying attention. And when you're in the mood for a deck like this one definitely accomplishes that. Trading Post, another fantastic utility card. You're making creatures, you're sacrificing creatures to get artifacts back, you're sacrificing artifacts to draw cards, and what better artifact to sacrifice than Ugin's Nexus? So it's basically going to let you take an extra turn if you can get rid of it. And I got a couple ways to do that. Phyrexia's Core, Trading Post, Baron is in here. There's something I figured out at one point with Prototype Portal that does that, but I don't even know. I mean, figure it. You guys explain it to me. I don't know how to play this deck yet. This deck's really weird and really fun to play. You've also got Mirrorworks, where you can make an extra copy of the card when it comes into play. So you can double your Steel Hellkite or double your Mirror Battlesphere. And again, if you're just activating Musio for 4 to get something into play, you're going to have the 2 left over, and it just helps you value out towards the end of the game. I put Moon Silver Spear in here as just an additional win con. Generally, I have to kill people with combat damage, so giving myself another way to put tokens into play and get people in the air with evasion seemed like a good idea, and it's an artifact, so there you go. Precursor Golem. It is 9 power for 5 mana. If your opponent doesn't have a removal spell for it, you're going to be beaten down and triggering all kinds of things. Like Sharding Sphinx, whenever an artifact creature you control deals damage to a player, you make a Thopter. So if you have a Thopter and 3 Golems hitting somebody, you're going to make 4 Thopters. And then the next turn you hit them with, 5 or 6 or 7 things, you make 5 or 6 or 7 Thopters. So you are just going off if you're hitting people with multiple creatures with this. Pretty cool card. And a great thing to copy with Stolen Identity, as are all the fatties I showed you earlier, or creatures your opponents control, and then you're ciphering onto one of your flyers with evasion, and you're casting it again, and you can kind of see how the deck can get a little bit obnoxious and carried away, and so can your opponents, which is why you need to have some control. So these are mostly the control cards in the deck to interact with people while you're trying to get your dirtily Musio online or protect your Musio. Crystal Shard returns any of your ETB creatures to your hand, and then you can replay them for that effect. You can protect your general from a board wipe. You can bounce your opponent's things if they're tapping out for them. It's just a really great card. Aether Spellbomb, just a grease the wheels kind of card. You can cycle it or you can bounce something. Baron is going to sacrifice your permanents like your Thopters or something you got for free, something cheap, even a land in the late game, to bounce your opponent's threats. So if your opponent has like a Jund deck and they haven't blown up all your artifacts, you're just bouncing their, big dirtily creatures back to their hand every turn and outracing them with your mid-range deck. Endbringer, super sweet colorless card. It untaps during each player's untap step. So once it's not summoning sick, once this thing's online, you can make it so creatures can't attack. You can make it so they can't block. You can draw cards. You can deal damage. It's super busted. Really love this card in this deck. Icy Manipulator is another way just to kind of keep your opponents at bay. You block tap down their biggest thing. And then what I noticed after I had built this deck is I said, boy, I have a lot of things that just incidentally target. I should put Dismiss into Dream in this deck. And then I remembered there's also Will Breaker. So Will Breaker is not in my other deck that runs Dismiss into Dream, but it is in this deck because I actually want your creatures and I want to be attacking with creatures. So if I can land a Will Breaker and my opponents aren't disrupting it, I'm just going to slowly, like, incidentally target their things with one of these effects and steal all of their creatures and kill them with them. This card's really fun in the right build, and I jammed it in there. It is a Nombo with Dismiss into Dream, but, I mean, you're going to set it up. You're going to have one or the other in play. Occasionally you'll draw the second one and be upset that you played the first one, but whatever. Once you have these kind of synergies going, the odds of you seeing both cards are pretty low. And it lets me play one of my favorite little techs in a second one of my decks, Dismiss into Dream with Talaria. The creature does not have to have banding for you to activate Talaria, and you get to do it on any upkeep. So you can save it up until it really matters and target their creature to either destroy it with Dismiss or steal it with Will Breaker. Super fun card, and it's very easy to run. There's no drawback. Curse of the Swine, another way to deal with your opponent's threats. You just need this card if you don't have board wipes. That's all I can say. There's reanimation cards out there. There's just really powerful generals and threats, and Curse of the Swine gives you a ton of versatility to deal with that, as does Blatant Thievery. This is one of the ways that blue can not only have a secondary win con, but it can also stop threats that they otherwise have a hard time dealing with, like enchantments or, certain Voltron generals. There's just so much utility to Blatant Thievery, and a deck that's ramping this hard is happy to run this card. All right, we need a couple of counter spells. I'm not trying to be a bully here, but you got to protect your board in a deck like this. You're going to get way out of control, and especially Bane of Progress. I mean, that is our arch enemy in this deck. I do not want to see a Bane of Progress or a Merciless Eviction naming artifacts. I can survive a board wipe. I can usually get going again, but I can't have all my artifacts destroyed. So if you're going to build this deck and pilot it, keep that in mind. Summary Dismissal, I'm running just for Bane of Progress so that it can't get reanimated. And if it is cheated into play instead of cast, I can counter the ability. So I'm testing this card out. It seems pretty fun. I'm sure there's some other abilities that'll come up that it could be good with. And we've got our Break Glass in case of emergency card, Nev Disc. Obviously, we don't want to destroy all of our own artifacts, but if your board's already been reset, this is a nice utility card, and it's just a great threat to have in play. It makes your opponents play differently. As long as you know you have it, you can play around it and deal with it. Washout is one of the MVPs of the deck. Just bounce all the green creatures or bounce all the white creatures or whatever you need to do and swing in for lethal damage, or just completely reset your opponents while you're busy grinding value with all your card draw spells and cheating things into play. And finally, I can't help myself, I'm running Capsize. Sometimes you just need it. I feel like it's justified in a mono blue build where it's hard to deal with certain things. So there it is. All right, kind of a long deck tech because this deck is really weird and complicated and fun and cute, and it's just something to do that's not like super control based. It's really mid-rangey, has a ton of play to it. I've enjoyed piloting the deck so far, other than when I get Bane of Progress. So we will just counter that every time. Thanks for watching, you guys. I've got the full deck list in the links below. You can also join our Facebook group, $2 Magic, and I've got a website now online. It's the number 2, dollarmagic.com.